Well, still with me in studio, Benjamin Anthony and Dan Perry. Dan, I want to begin with you. The issue of the Murad corridor still a sticking point, and this humanitarian city that we have talked about here in studio also still a sticking point. But in your opinion, this is not feasible, it seems. Why so?
Not just not feasible, completely ridiculous and unstrategic. For Israel to build a city to house 500,000 or 1 million people, that its own former leaders are calling concentration camp, after almost 2 years of war, runs so counter to the strategic need, societal, economic, moral need of Israel to end this war, that it boggles the mind. By all accounts, it'll take a half year to a year to build the city. It will then embroil Israel in managing a huge Palestinian population for many years when most of the public wants the war to end now. And every poll shows they're prepared to end the war now, yes, even leaving Hamas in power if that's what it has to be, because it's not the same Hamas. They're in power of a pile of rubble. So, yeah, the Israeli public is prepared to do that. But there are better ways. There are better ways. The idea that we are still, after 21, 22 months, almost quibbling in the weeds with a genocidal jihadist terrorist group that's mostly been crushed over this corridor or that corridor is such a reflection of incompetence that I hardly, as you can see, have the words. There were better ways to engineer an endgame. And it would have begun with agreeing on what the endgame should be and then reverse engineering it. And from the beginning, there was a very clear endgame, imperfect, but the only game in town, which would involve some version of the Palestinian Authority with massive assistance and Israeli supervision and $100 billion and all the rest of it to present to the Palestinians an alternative that would create pressure on Hamas to give up. Now, the fact that they haven't given up after 22 months probably suggests that it isn't a great idea to continue doing the exact same thing. And I have to say that there is a way forward. Hamas has already made clear that they're prepared to hand over the reins of civilian power. Israel and Israelis suspect correctly that Hamas wants a Hezbollah-like scenario where they're a militia and armed behind the scenes, lording it over the civilian government. That's the actual issue. And there are ways to create pressure on what's left of Hamas to give up there as well. But Israel's not doing any of it. Israel's preparing, if we're to believe what we see and what we hear from officials, for a forever guerrilla insurgency. My only hope, well, I have two hopes. One, that Trump will put his foot down, and the other, that Netanyahu will look at the calendar and notice that he has elections in a year and understand that this is a very unpopular way forward.
Benjamin, I want your take on this, because there are proponents for this deal that say it separates Hamas from the civilians after a successful Gideon's Chariots operation, where the IDF already has about 70% control of the Gaza Strip.
Now we have a moment to take the Gazan people. There's a clear end game. Donald Trump, the man who you just said should put his foot down, something, by the way, I don't agree with outsourcing leadership to an American president ever, including a great friend of Israel.
Only when
the fact of the matter. No, you don't know. You've not heard my previous statements, but I heard your statement. Donald Trump has said that the Gazans should move elsewhere beyond the borders of Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that Israel is pursuing that outcome. That is the only sensible outcome. If you are like me and you're not a particular fan of the Gazans, and I served in this war, I served along the Netzarim corridor going east to west of Gaza, constantly, endlessly, dozens of times. If you are like me and you're not a particular fan of the Gazans because you believe that they have agency and you believe that they supported the genocidal acts of Hamas and you believe that they chanted and cheered as our soldiers, dead soldiers, hostages, were displayed throughout Gaza when they were taken on October the 7th, and they have responsibilities as a consequence of that. If you actually don't deal in the soft bigotry of low expectations, you're perhaps not a fan of the Gazans, which is the case with me. But if you are a fan of the Gazans, you don't want them living in the Gaza Strip either, because as Dan correctly said, it is a pile of rubble. The cities have been destroyed. It is uninhabitable. Steve Witkoff did the right thing when he went there and said as much. They need to be given the opportunity and the incentive to leave. They need to be moved out of the areas that they previously inhabited that no longer exist as functioning cities, and the international communities, that there is such a thing. First and foremost, Egypt, which is massively culpable for what happened on October 7th. Egypt and the Europeans, who are so desperate to speak about the rights of the Gazans, these people, these countries, these nations need to show their international bona fides and absorb the Gazans onto their midst.
Depopulate Gaza will, in fact, to do that as your plan would be correctly seen as ethnic cleansing.
No, it
in
wouldn't
a
be seen
situation
as
as delicate as the Israeli-Palestinian tinderbox. That would be a recipe for another intifada and for
Clearly,
more
you guys
years
are
of
talking
problems for the
about
Palestinians.
the issue
not
that we
ethnic
have been
cleansing.
all living
It's
in
not
for
genocide.
648
That's not-
I never
days
said it was
now.
genocide.
And as these teams continue to talk in Doha as we speak, I think you're both hitting at the core of this problem, and that is that 3 people, 1 room, and about 10 different opinions. Benjamin Anthony and Dan Perry, thank you very much.
Thank you.